Hello, and welcome to the Disability Myth. My name is Dominic, and I live with a fatal disease called spinal muscular atrophy. Together, my amazing caretaker, co host, and best friend, Uriel, and I plan to debunk misconceptions, share our personal experiences, and shatter your expectations. But we're not stopping there. We're bringing in experts, thought leaders, and everyday people who are smashing through societal barriers, paving the way for a more inclusive world. Whether you're tuning in to learn, empathize, or simply to be entertained, the show promises to be an eye-opening experience that transcends boundaries. Because when it comes down to it, what makes us different is what makes us extraordinary.
There's still a lot of attitudinal barriers, and the ADA, although it was a great achievement for its time, it's pretty clear, right, that people, um, at least the non-disabled majority of people, right, and even us, have a long way to go in terms of educating ourselves and, as I said, just learning from disabled people. Um,
Yeah, no, I think
a lot.
those are all very valid points, and I totally agree with you. And I'll respond by saying, we started this podcast for a couple of reasons, but one of them is to share our stories, right? Not only my stories, but everybody who's on this podcast and their stories. Um, and I'll share a story real quick because it seems relevant.
Mhm.
When I was at UCLA, I of course, like I've mentioned probably before on the podcast, had my accommodations in order with the Office for Students with Disabilities. They're aware of my SMA. They're aware of you know, my
Mhm.
condition, my
Mhm.
limitations physically.
Mhm.
And as I've mentioned on the podcast before, in order for me to use the restroom, I have to have somewhere to lie down. And, you know, when I would go to take my final exams and midterms and whatnot, I would have to leave my dorm and go all the way to the opposite entire side of campus to take my exams because that's where they proctored you um
Mhm.
to give you your accommodations, which for me,
Mhm.
like I've said before, were just extra time um scribe to fill out my answers for me and like uh breaks for suctioning to clear my congestion. And one of the major issues that was never addressed when I was there, though, that I really wished I would have pushed harder for
Mhm.
was my bathroom needs. Because, like I said, I had to cross the other side of campus to take my exams. And that was about a 25, 30-minute walk from my dorm room. And I had nowhere on campus I could lie down to use my urinal.
Mhm.
And so I had one time, as embarrassing as this is to say, I'll say it because it needs to be said, right? Um, I literally peed myself because I had stayed up all night and, crammed a bunch of Red Bulls, studying for my like astronomy exam.
Mhm.
And uh I regret not peeing before I left. I never leave anywhere now. I never leave the house now without making sure my bladder is empty. Because that taught me a very important lesson that day.
Mhm.
But it's unfortunate that it came to that, right?
Mhm.
And I feel it's important, like you said, you turn that rage that you may have regarding the issues that we face, you funnel that into mentorship. And so I guess what I'm trying to do here is funnel my stories and my rage of pissing
Uh,
myself into you know, making people aware of just our everyday kind of struggles. So
yeah, and I
yeah.
think thank you for no for sharing that very personal story. I think that this is like a very like it's a very important and critical story, which is this is the like this is the basic needs, right, that we're talking about. And
Yep.
one thing I would like to say is one of your questions was how does being an advocate get to you sometimes?
We-
Right? Like you, I, and this is especially true at the university setting, unfortunately, for many physically disabled students, right? And for many of us, like, we've only known the reality where we're the only disabled person, right, in the room, let alone in spaces, right, from any learning environment, right? And so, um, we have to acknowledge there's some uncomfortable feelings and also awkwardness that comes from being right in that position, being like, well, but maybe if I'm an advocate, then I have to, as you said, be very open about, these very personal things,
There's a
right?
lot of vulnerability involved in being an advocate.
And I think we have to, acknowledge and be thankful, right, to all these people who, right, like came before us who were in that same position of, giving these stories.
Hmm.
But that takes work, and that takes a lot of, not just mental energy, but you as an individual will have your own like unique embodied experience. And so thinking about how this is your basic needs, right? We're talking at USC and even at UCB, one of the biggest issues is just like housing and just getting around in the classroom, having your own desk, you know. So you can imagine, right, that like you, I've and not being able to take breaks or whatever it may be, given the structure of the program, the way that, and I would like to say that sometimes the university, the way that these disability offices are operating is from their perspective, typically, right?
Mhm.
And so that leads us to think about, okay, what are the limitations, right, to that? And what accommodations, let alone just things, right, access needs that we could request. And I think you bring up a really good point, which is I don't speak for everybody, and we both can agree on that, but we can agree that all of us deserve to have our basic needs met.
Yeah,
And
well,
we,
and like, as I'm
yeah.
sure you're aware of,
Mm.
familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Oh yeah. No.
physiological needs, they're not very high up on the totem pole. It's a very basic need. So the
Right.
fact that like someone such as myself had to, urinate in my own pants, like
Mhm.
it speaks a
Yeah.
lot to, I think, the problems
Oh yeah.
that are being
No.
overlooked,
I
right?
definitely feel like and this is what I'm saying, like even the fact that you're telling me this story, right? Or that you had this story to tell, let alone, this knowledge that you can, either give to people that you're close to, that is powerful in itself.
Yep.
I think that for me, there's been many times, because I'm also, as you said, like autistic, and I also, there are many times where I find that I can be a mentor to others that are younger than me, or perhaps, going through something very similar, but there's not a lot of mentors out there for me to look up to.
That's how I always felt growing up too.
So
And like that's
that
what's
there's that as well, which is like what if this is the bare minimum, meaning from the legal standpoint, right? The school is required to state school, right, in this case. Then what does that doesn't actually translate, perhaps, right, to something that we actually need, right?
Right.
I think you bring up a good point, which is like if we don't have our basic needs met, whether that's housing, physical therapy, psychological support, which I've had trouble getting, and USC has health insurance. So I pay for that fee. We're paying for things. We pay the same tuition. That's another thing too.
Yeah.
Um, so what does that actually mean for us and at not only now, but like in the workforce? And, does that mean that basic needs won't be provided for us,
Right.
at that basic level? And so I think your story, like, it illuminates like many important um points, which is that, we're at the university level. This is, and um there's a lot more like neurodivergent students, but there's not many physically disabled students, at
Hmm.
least in my experience. So that's why, we're often an afterthought, right? Or they don't think about that. And it's often, um, I think that we have to acknowledge again that disabled people throughout history have been, right, like exploited, abused, right, tokenized and subjects of
Neglected.
medical
Mm.
research by and for non-disabled people because
Yeah.
that's who's doing the research. And we really have to acknowledge, okay, so if that's the way that society has gotten knowledge about disability for so long, which typically is the case, then how do we be an advocate with our own in our own right and our own um stories to tell? Because for you to be think about for you and me to be friends, one, and then to also be this like open, it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of not just people, but it takes a lot of growing in all of us, right? So, and my hope is that instead of always tokenizing us or making us feel like we're the only one, right, that can kind of give this advice, that, I mean, it is a basic need, right?
Yeah.
Um, and, we all, I think, understand that in order to, right, like, survive in this, not thrive, but just survive in this capitalist society, that we have to advocate for ourselves as no one will. I think
Right.
that, right? So your story, it brings up, and I have very similar stories, and this one, I'll just briefly, there's been a lot of instances where I've like been, in an emergency, with like a fire or the fire alarm goes off,
Yeah.
right? What do they do to me, or not to me, but for me in that situation?
Hmm.
They don't know what to do,
Yep.
right? So,
Yeah.
um,
I remember the fire drills going around at UCLA when I used to live there.
mm,
Everybody would evacuate. Every person that was able to would evacuate by going down the stairs. And then when everybody was done,
mhm,
they would have me take the elevator down as if like an afterthought. Not that, there's like an inherent problem with me going last, which I mean, we could argue there is, but it's just, it's not good It's not a good look. It's not good for the
No,
optics, you know?
no.
Like,
No.
why are they completely neglecting this one group of students, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
just a drill, but still the principle is there.
Right.
Right. And you're speaking to a really good point, which is these are, think about it, there are institutions in our society that we know, right, have the prestige and the expertise, right, to um serve, right, these students. But I think part of it is we have to make sure that students, as you were speaking to earlier, are even comfortable, right, to ignite their passion, to talk about like,
Yeah.
what they're going through, right? Like, even the fact that, like we're able to speak about this says there were people in our lives that like that really wanted us to be an advocate for ourselves, but for others, because one thing that my dad always says is, be the change that you want to see. And for a while, I was like, you don't understand. Like, this is really hard, and I just want to give up.
Yeah.
But I think, it wasn't until um, you're in the adult world and you're learning along the way that you realize that not every person um is as comfortable as you are. Even the fact that you say, well, that was not a good look. Who's gonna who's gonna bring that to their attention, right?
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
and that's very hard to do for some people, right? Or it's very hard to do when you don't have a community behind you that is also
Yeah.
saying, yeah, that you can't just leave Sophia or Dominic in like the classroom while you evacuate.
In a burning
You
building.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, thinking about how um and each one of those experiences, even though they hurt us sometimes, and they degrade us, which not a lot of people actually talk about enough, which is the emotional toll that comes with just, right, like ableism and every day, like having to see it and also just experience it. But imagine if you don't create spaces where people feel comfortable or can do that, then how are you supposed to move forward as an inclusive society that, accounts for, um, and I don't know. It just sometimes it's surprising that, even the top institutions or not even schools, it's just everything, right? The
Right.
system doesn't serve people that need the most help or are the most impacted, right?
Right.
That which um I think I don't know about you, but I feel invigorated after every time I mentor students or help them with project or like putting golf carts on our campus,
Yeah.
right? UCSP or doing something like that. But you also have to remember that with that emotional toll, there is, as I just said, an opportunity for, collective visibility, again, being conscious of the diversity of your community and being like, well, who's not? I think one of the things I've learned from the autism, because I was um le like a leadership delegate for 1 year, and it was the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, and one of the things that'll always like stick with me is you don't have to put all this pressure on yourself um to advocate all the time, but you can advocate for the people that you care about, like around you in your life,
Yeah,
all of that. And because it's hard, like systemic problems, yeah, they'll take a long time to address. But I think just being able to say, I did that, and that was rewarding,
yeah,
right? I
definitely.
think that's what's kept me going, um, and others going like this far.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
100% agree. We've obviously covered a lot here regarding advocacy, the intricacies of it, the effects it has on us as individuals. But I think the last thing I want to ask you is, do you believe there's a quote unquote right way to advocate and or a wrong way to advocate? Because I've always felt when I saw other people advocating issues
Mhm.
for themselves that like I feel like the loudest people can be the most easy to ignore, but the quietest advocates are the easiest to pay attention to, at least in my experience. Like I'm personally more drawn to people that, aren't so quote unquote loud and quote unquote, you know, on the front lines. It's the little things like I feel like this podcast
Mhm.
that will resonate, at least hopefully resonate with people, you know?
Mhm. No, you bring up one of the like core questions I think that a lot of people have about, right? Like advocating. And what I would like to say is, right, there's a difference between serving your students and managing them, which is something I learned recently in my leadership class. Managing and um, serving them rather than actually advocating with them, right? Or advocating, for their what their needs are and all that. And I think that we really have to be careful. So a good advocate acknowledges um their positionality in their community.
Yeah.
So what privileges they have, why they're able to like I was able to speak to the mayor of Santa Barbara, for example. That is not something you can just do,
Yeah.
right? So being aware of where you are, right, in your community, even if it's as small as, right, Santa Barbara, for example. Um, Good advocacy or good advocate looks at the collective rather than just the individual.
Individual. Yeah.
So you're looking at the diversity and the nuances of your community and looking at those most impacted. Because sometimes, even though I can speak to, for example, like disability justice advocacy, um, for example, like I'm not, a mom or a parent, so I couldn't speak on some of those, right, inequities or those problems, right? Maybe one day, but right now, right, like that's not my um expertise, right, to
Right.
get. Um, and um, lastly, I'll say is I think language and knowledge, like the way that people learn about things and not just learn about it, but then speak about the discourse surrounding, right,
Mhm.
is more important than people realize.
Yeah, definitely.
So a good advocate is always aware, right, of how that language, one, is important to the community, and for example, like person first and um identity first, right? There's all these nuances, right, about how, but knowing, right, that um language and the way that you talk about it, also the way that, as I said before, like no person in that community can actually represent everybody. So,
Yeah.
um, I think being conscious of just the way that people talk about disability, for example, sometimes, let's take um, the university setting for an example. It's very different, in my opinion, from how I would serve, right, disabled students in a more holistic, right,
Hmm.
intersectional way. But that's because we look at it as services, right? And we look at it from a very medical model view,
Right.
right? So the framework in which you want to advocate from and use the language and learn about the um, community from is as important as, what you're doing and all that. Because, yeah, I've had multiple um, encounters with even adults that are like, um, why is this language, for example, why is, like identity first language, why is it so important? And
Yeah.
it's not until I explain that they're like, oh, that makes sense. So being
Right.
able to listen and learn, actively always doing that, I think is something that and creating space like you are right now to talk about that I think is like really, really important. A bad advocate, on the other hand, um does pretty much the opposite of what I just said. But one of the things I would say that I've had to learn is that one language for some people language may be different, but it has a significance, so it's important to like see, see people with different perspectives and why. And the other half is sometimes it can be hard to as I said, like take your anger and your frustration and put it to action. But for me, I think a bad advocate, it's funny because um this was my freshman year of college. So I didn't know what was ahead. And I think a bad advocate is basically one that doesn't validate like others' experiences beyond their own. And I think
Yeah.
for me, I had to learn that this is bigger than myself now, right? Which is um why, I did all of the advocating that I did. But I think that it's important to understand that advocacy is not just about policy, right? Back to your definition. And it's also um and change. It's also about compassion combined with, as I said, the intentionality and
Yes.
also um yeah, just all of these things and having compassion beyond yourself at that point.
Yeah.
Uh, because yeah, there's so many students outside in and outside of higher ed that I've, worked with or mentored or worked with their families. And um they're so grateful. Their families are so grateful, right? Or so happy to talk to me or have their child speak to me about their future, right?
Yeah.
But that's what true advocacy should be.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's what keeps me going. And it gets me kind of emotional, but I think that's that to be, as I said, forward facing and intentional, and then validate feelings, but don't like wallow in them
Very
or
important.
like reminisce because
Yeah,
I've done that before.
that's a slippery slope.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think you bring up a really good point too, that it's important to look beyond the individualistic perspective and take in all the perspectives that, as best you can, everybody comes from. You know, one of the first things I learned in my communication courses is that people come from different cultures on a micro and a macro level, and that has a strong impact on their values, their beliefs, their lifestyles,
Mm.
everything, right? So you may encounter some people that, such as myself, personally, I like the term person with a disability,
Hmm.
but a lot of people might not. A lot of people might just refer to themselves as a disabled person. And that's like that's, I think, a culturalistic perspective that
Yes.
doesn't have to be set in stone. People
Hmm.
are able to change. Their values can change. It's difficult, but it can happen. And
I
ultimately,
think that one of the experiences I took away from being a part of the self-advocacy network is that exact fact, which is we all want the best for, ourselves and our loved ones. And there's a reason why, you know, this language is used, right?
yeah,
Or why people want to be and to not speak for people. I think that there is unfortunately a lot still out there where um disabled people aren't the ones talking
yeah,
about themselves, let alone communicating about themselves, right? And of course, this needs to change, but I think that a good start is actually, as you said, creating space and making people feel like there are nuances
yeah,
in that community and, actually setting the time. I know people are like, what do you mean? The time, the people, and um, you could even get rid of money for a sec. But the time and the people to listen, it really does make a difference, right?
yeah,
So yeah, I agree. I agree.
for sure. Any final thoughts, bro?
No, that was all well said, man.
All
Really excellent.
right then. Well,
Can I ask Ariel something?
yeah, go for
Yeah.
it.
So as Dom's like caregiver, right, you interact with him like every day,
Yep.
Just a
pretty
little.
much.
Yep.
And my question to you is, how do you see yourself, even though you're not the one, like you're not in his body and you're not experiencing, right, like some of the things, how do you see yourself as an advocate as well? Because I think a big point also is the people that are in our, as I said, network of care, are also our advocates.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
So,
well, I've always viewed Dom as a friend first, but then I remember when I started working for Dom, the first interaction I would get when I tell people that I'm a caretaker, oh, you're so nice. Oh, you're the best. They really need it. Like stuff like that would always get to me because it would piss me off a little bit because it almost came off
mm,
as a little dehumanizing. It's like, oh, you're so brave for doing. It's like, what do you mean? Like, it has to be done, right? And
mhm.
like the systems in place aren't helping, so I have to step in. It's always like, so how do I feel where I fit in? Not quite sure. It's like it's complicated because a lot of the time it's me doing my best explaining the people that I enjoy doing it, but also a little infuriating at times because you know, like as Dom said, like disabled people are just kind of treated as a second thought, whatever, and they're praising me for doing the work.
So like, oh,
But
you're doing
like,
God's work.
right, but it's I don't know, it's what I'm doing is good and it's I like helping, but at the same time, over time it kind of like wears on you, right? But
Yeah,
I just do my best and I just do my best to tell people to it's odd because like even though I'm able-bodied, I have to constantly fight ableism in little ways. And then
that's a
people
really good point.
and it's like it's a little, and it's they can get exhausting at times. It's exhausting for me, so I can't even imagine how it must be for Dom at times, just trying to like, advocate for yourself, even like at a public bar or like a social gathering and whatnot, right?
Yeah,
You know, and
definitely.
it's
No, I think it's really great hearing like you and your relationship because like I think that a big part of like how we move forward as a society is we are humans and we have human needs, but at the end of the day, it often is seen like or framed as extra or something that we have to request. And you bring up a good point, which is disabled people aren't the only ones affected by ableism, let alone, ableist supremacy and thought. So thinking about how we as are the primary educators, right? The ones, but there's also people that see that, right, and are able to um I think that ultimately we all want to be treated with the utmost dignity and respect, but it is often it is hard to as I said, like sometimes the people that you care about, like to watch them like kind of go through that. I think it's definitely um like a very powerful experience and um also we don't we don't say this enough, but I thank you to the both of you for like all the work that you're doing. Because, I think that we don't say that we see each other a lot, like in what we're doing, but I do. I mean, I
Yeah.
see, it's funny, Santa Barbara is so small, but
oh yeah.
stay in touch with people.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's great to see, like, there is humanity in the way that we should treat each other, let alone we care for. It just happens that our society, I think there is something about not only advocating for yourself as a, marginalized person or multiply marginalized, but it's also like, what if the people around us are also, aware and aware that this is the proper way to advocate for us, right? Or alongside us rather than just, as you said, Ariel, like being um treated like, you're doing something that no one else wants to do, right? Um, so yeah, but
I have a lot of those, having Dom can relate. I have a lot of those pop the bubble conversations
Yeah.
where I see, especially with like other people, when I talk about disabled people, it's like popping that like, oh, and they have like a moment of like empathy. It's like, oh, I've never really thought of it like that,
Well, and like the thing
you
about
know?
Uriel is she literally has no filter.
Um,
He'll just say what's on his mind,
yeah, for better or for
for
worse.
better or for worse, and I love him the more for it. So I think it goes back to like what you said, overlooking um being able to move beyond the individualistic perspective, coming together, right? That's what it's all about. Like what we do,
You
what you do on a daily
also,
basis.
I think one thing I mentioned or Ariel like reminded me of is you don't always, and you don't always have to be polite all the time. And I think that one of the things that I've learned is the squeaky wheel
Yep.
like gets things done. And
Yeah.
honestly, I feel like people who are like disabled people, I don't know, we like they're like, you swear? Like, why would like
Mhm.
Yeah, just
what's
like a
wrong
normal
with you?
dude.
Like,
Oh,
of course we do. But just always right, say like we have this image, like charity image, right? And it's time that we're like we can speak up for ourselves in
Yeah.
whatever form that may look like. And I can, I can sw swear and but I feel like it's funny we typically are the ones to always just be like um we take what we're given,
Yeah.
right? And
mm.
it would be great if we I tell my students that, it doesn't always have to be that way, but right now it is, but it may change. And so, yeah, I think we both can agree that, even though our society has a lot of work to do, like we know, um, how to move forward and, um, even though, like, as I said, like this podcast, like the whole myth about being at the front lines, I think people, if they look around them, like I always say, look around you, and there's probably a lot of disabled individuals
Yeah.
that are, you know,
Yeah.
but that within itself, right, is just the fact that you're here doing your work and doing everyday life, I think, is a form of advocacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Each
it's
one
like you
of,
said,
yeah.
it's like you said, everyone's an advocate in their own right,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's important.
Because,
So I'll end it with that. But yeah, definitely keep going, keep doing the work that you're all doing because yeah, it's great.
You too, Sophia.
oh yeah. Thank you.
Any final thoughts?
Oh no, like she said, it takes time.
Yeah.
Because every time we go out and do our little social outings or we go to the barber shop, every time we do it, the community just normalizes it over time.
Yeah.
Locals start saying hi. It's like, oh, I heard your episode on what? Well, I'm like, oh, you did? I'm like, oh, I'm always surprised. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it's like the beauty in that is that not only are people in our local area watching it, right, which is in the Santa Barbara County, but like we're normalizing it sounds weird to say it, right? But it's we're normalizing your existence,
Yeah.
which is so important to do.
Yeah.
And then what happened, and like it
And
feels weird
that's
to
the
say
other
it.
thing, like disabled people can get a haircut, go to the
Yeah.
grocery
Right.
store. I think that there are so many instances, like you said, where people are like, do you need my help? It's like, well, I wouldn't need your help if things were right back to the social model of disability, but thinking about how if this was fixed, or if this Trader Joe's like it had everything at my level and I didn't have to ask for help, that'd be great.
Yep.
But
Right.
just know that yeah, that you're advocating for just by living, I guess, because you bring visibility to
Right.
those right
Like the
those
disabled
gaps.
experience. Yeah.
Right. And then my only hope is that like the more we do it and the more I continues to do it and because that starts conversations. Oh, I heard that you do this thing and then we tell them about it and then it leads to hopefully this avalanche of
Snowball.
education.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like when we're like informing the greater community about the challenges and the issues that
Yeah.
like, that you have to overcome. Then all of a sudden, oh well, I know Dom. He's like he comes to get my hair. It's like that communal thing. Then it also inspires
Well,
other people to,
final little story here before we wrap up.
yeah.
Like we go to this barber shop here in town, and
Uh,
the guy that usually cuts my hair, when I first walked in, or I mean rolled in to get my hair cut,
uh,
um, he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember you from the high school. You're the
Yeah.
guy with the Jordans,
The
with the
Jordan.
Jordans on the shoes." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, that's me, man, Jordan guy."
Jordan. Yeah.
And it's nice to be recognized for things other than like your disability,
Oh yeah.
So
no, and yeah, and exactly. Like I think that we have to realize that disability is a big part of how we shape our perspective and everything. But it's also how that perspective is shaped is informed by our disability, but it doesn't mean right that um like it's the first thing people see, let's be honest. So yeah,
yeah,
I agree with you that with like over Zoom and even now you can't see, but I think it's really telling, right? That if you don't have those weighing attitudinal barriers, right, as much as the physical ones and the policy ones, then you can actually do like create a community and where people can actually be leaders and advocate for themselves and for others. And it's great when you have people in your community that um genuinely care about, like your success and where you are and your everyday. I always say the locals are like, I don't know, they were the best that when I was growing up. So
yeah,
because even though they weren't like in my um immediate like environment, like they did care about like how I was doing, how was she doing? And obviously like you, I stood out, quite a lot from everybody else. So, you know, um, but in part that is a good thing
yeah,
if the communities around you are supportive.
yep,
So
definitely.
that's cool though.
It's
Oh
cool.
yeah. It's fun.
All right, I think that's a good note to end on. Um, we hope that you learned a little bit about advocacy today, and we hope that if you are an advocate, you continue to do so. And
Right.
like Sophia said, doesn't matter how you do it necessarily, because you are an advocate in your own right. So keep doing your thing. And if you liked what we had to say today, please feel free to leave us a rating,
I'll follow.
a nice little follow, perhaps a nice little review on Apple Podcasts. We're also, of course, on Spotify, YouTube, the whole shebang.
No.
So be sure to share with your friends and family. If you're not already, be sure to leave us a follow on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube as well. We've got a bunch of new followers on Instagram the past week, and we're excited to have you all on board, and we hope you enjoy the episode and the content. So, with that being said, you know the deal. Peace and love, and may the force be with you.
Bye.